Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a special council meeting of May the 16th, 2023 for the purpose of training. Attendance has been taken, noting that Councillor Coleman is not here. We have regrets from Councillor Coleman. Councillor Chambers, we haven't heard from. I'm sure he will. I'm not sure he will come. He might come. You're never sure with Councillor Chambers. So attendance has been taken, which takes us to number 2 on the agenda, which is the approval of the agenda, noting that it is a special meeting and we can't add to the agenda. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Pierce and Councillor Garneau. All those in favor of the agenda the way it stands, thank you. Declaration of pecuniary interest. I can't imagine any for a training session, but I'll ask. Seeing none. We're going to go to number 4 on the agenda, which is a delegation, 4.1, and it's going to be Keeley. You're going to come up and tell us everything you know about accessibility. Welcome.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Keely Wozniak, and I'm the Accessibility and Inclusion Coordinator here at the county, and I am here for accessibility training. So Dr. Keene's X Factor. No prognosis can account for how powerful human will can be as a determinant in the quality of someone's life. So us here at the county, we have the power to affect people's quality of life by how much we engage in people with disabilities and put that thought into everything we do here. So this is the inaccessibility cycle. So we have inaccessibility, which means disabled people are unable to participate in activities of daily living, which means they are not visible in public. If they are not visible in public, they are seen as outliers or rare. So then we think that there's little to no need to consider them in thoughts and processes, which leads to more inaccessibility. So we need to break the cycle, and we need to put their needs at the forefront, because accessible needs are human needs, and we need to consider everybody. So the definition of disability is any degree of physical disability, infirmary, malformation, or disfigurement that is caused by bodily injury, birth defect, or illness. A condition of mental impairment or a developmental disability, a learning disability, or a dysfunction in one or more of the processes involved in understanding or using symbols or spoken language, a mental disorder, or an injury or disability for which benefits were claimed or received under the insurance plan established under the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act of 1997. So this is a very similar definition to the Ontario Human Rights Code, which lists a various amount of disabilities. However, no list of disabilities can be exhaustive, as there are so many available. But any disabilities past or present, even temporary disabilities, are covered under the Human Rights Code and can be considered for discrimination if they can prove discrimination based on a disability, temporary or permanent. So accessibility is the law. So like I said, the Ontario Human Rights Code says that people with disabilities must be free from discrimination where they work, live, and receive services, and their needs must be accommodated. The code and the AODA work together in various ways to promote equality and accessibility. If there's a conflict between the two, the one with the higher level of accessibility comes first. So, for example, I had a question here at the county about a sidewalk regulation and whether or not something would be accessible, which it would go against our regulations, against our bylaws if we did it. However, I had to step in and say, well, the Human Rights Code says higher level accessibility comes first. Because it was for accessibility, we need to put that accessibility first. So that's how that works. And under the Human Rights Code, we have the duty to accommodate, which means we have to accommodate people's different needs, even if that means we change processes or policies in order to accommodate them, and we have to do that to the point of undue hardship. So undue hardship is to the point we can accommodate and it's seen as reasonable. There are only 2 reasons we can claim undue hardship, one being financial, if the cost would be too great, or if it was a health and safety risk to the person with the disability or to people around them. So an example would be if someone requires a hard hat to do their job and they find it uncomfortable due to sensory needs, we may try to find a different solution, but we could say, sorry, we can't employ you for that if you can't wear our safety protection on the job. Or if a small airline had a pilot who lost his peripheral vision, could no longer fly, and they did not have an alternate job for him to do. They couldn't keep him on their payroll because it would bankrupt them. They could then let him go, and they wouldn't be discriminatory because it would be undue hardship, because they couldn't keep him on the payroll and him not being able to do a job, and they had no jobs available. So the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, or the AODA, the goal of it was to create an accessible Ontario by 2025 by removing barriers in a number of areas, including attitudinal, structural, communications, and transportation barriers. Unfortunately, we are not going to reach that goal due to a variety of factors, not us personally here in the county, but across all of Ontario. Things get grandfathered in, so anything built before 2005 that hasn't been majorly renovated does not need to be made accessible. So things that are very old, those haven't been updated to a point where people need to fix them. And things can be very difficult. They keep changing the information and communication guidelines as far as what our website standards need to be, and as those move, it's harder to keep up with that. So we will not be fully accessible, but here at the county we try our best to do the best we can. And we're hoping that with the new Accessible Canada Act, that will help not only increase accessibility everywhere in Ontario, but across Canada as well. So under the AODA, we have the Integrated Accessibility Standards Regulations, or the IASR, and they are made up of general requirements, which would be accessibility plans, policies, trainings would all fall under there, and then 5 standards. So there is the Customer Service Standard, which covers how people receive goods and services.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
So we have a question, Councillor Pierce.
Yeah, sorry, through you. I wasn't sure whether we're going to wait to the end or not. But just before we go too far past it, through you, when you spoke of the statement, you said the cost is too great for some things that might not. Who determines that?
That would be the Ministry of Accessibility and Seniors determines whether the cost is too great. Us here in the county could probably never claim cost as a financial hardship, but you also have to prove that you have done everything you can to raise the money, whether that's through fundraising or grants. So you have to prove that you've applied to every grant possible and exhausted every single option before you can claim undue hardship for cost.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think what we're going to do here is we are going to ask questions as we need to then. So I have Councillor Miller and then I have Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was wondering, Keely, could you go back one slide? Okay, thank you. I read this and I'm confused because as the goal of the AODA is to create an accessible Ontario by 2025. Is that just public, or is it private, or is it anything that's accessible to the public? For example, a private restaurant would have to be. I don't know. This is something that I've never understood. Could you clarify that?
So that is any business in Ontario that has 1 or more employees are required to be accessible. However, like I said before, if it was done before 2005 and hasn't been majorly renovated, it does not need to be made accessible. So if someone was just painting walls, their building does not need to be fully compliant. If you're doing a major renovation of a space, then you would have to make it accessible. But if you're not doing a major renovation, that rule does not apply. But also the other problem with this is everybody self-reports, and there's no one checking to make sure people are A, reporting, and B, are reporting truthfully.
Okay, so everybody that has 1 employee or more.
Yes.
Public or private.
Public or private.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We are looking and have been looking at renovating downtown Paris. And one of the drivers in conversations with Alison before is meeting this requirement by 2025. And now I'm hearing you tell me that actually, and I'm going to guess that many of the businesses on the high street probably have that get out clause, if to use a term that expresses what you said. Are we able to, as a county, impose on them when we come to redesigning, rebuilding the high street? Can we force them to go to the point where we make them accessible?
Unfortunately, as the county, we have no power to force anybody in the county to do anything. That is up to them, and it is up to the ministry to enforce the AODA. We did speak with the ministry in a conference a couple weeks ago, and they are looking at updating their policies around it and updating how they're going to fine businesses and also how they're going to enforce the AODA in the future. But again, with the ministry, we have no idea how long that's going to take. So unfortunately, we have no power. We can suggest to them. We can go to them and say, hey, we're doing this major renovation. Would you like to be a part of it? We're suggesting accessibility, but we can't force them to be accessible.
Yes, if I could just follow that on then.
Yep.
And maybe the question is directed to Alice in her old job. I think it's a laudable thing to do to try and bring the standard up on the high street. Have we had conversations with individual business owners to find out just to what degree they would want to be a part of what we want to do?
Alice?
Thank you, through your worship. We have had discussions with many of the businesses. I don't know if I'd say all of them. One of the things that we ran into when working on the downtown master plan was the continuity of the sidewalk. So really, we were looking at public spaces, not private ones. The issue with a historical downtown like this is that it's not level, typically. So if we were going to design the sidewalk, even if one business wanted access to, say, putting a ramp out, the problem that we were running into was if we didn't widen the sidewalks, even if one business wanted to put a ramp out for accessibility purposes, they would be encroaching on our public space, making that inaccessible in terms of the width. So it was sort of an all or nothing. It wasn't a matter of whether they wanted to buy into it. It was allowing them the option to encroach on our public space, even when they ever wanted to go down that road of putting a ramp into their business.
So then it kind of dictates what we have to do. We have to assume that at least one person wants to do it, and then we have to have enough space beyond that one point. Thank you.
Any other questions before we continue? Councillor Miller?
Just on that topic, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Allison. When we do a CIP, we're helping them obviously update the storefront or whatnot. Is accessibility part of that? Do you know, or is that a question for Zach?
Through your worship, so we don't have a specific accessibility grant program. We could certainly look at including that in a CIP, and there's certain sort of point system that could be available for adding that into a renovation, but we don't have one specifically for that purpose.
No, I understand that. What I was wondering is if we just approve, sometimes these grants are up to $20,000. Do we just approve it, or do we say, well, yeah, it's great, you're meeting the criteria, but we also need you to be accessible? That's not part of it, though.
No.
That's not part of the ask at this point.
Through your worship, it's again, it would depend on the renovation they're doing. So if they were doing a facade entrance, then that would be something that would be suggested, but not mandated of them. If it was an upper story renovation, then no, that wouldn't be part of the conversation. So it sort of depends on what grant stream they'd be looking at.
Any other questions? I can't imagine that anyone wouldn't want to make it accessible when given the opportunity, especially with county money. I can't imagine anyone thinking that was a good idea. Anyway, I'm sorry. Keely, if you want to continue, please.
All right, so the customer service standard, like I was saying, covers how people receive goods and services. So this covers your customer service desks, training to staff. It covers support persons. So anyone who brings a support person with them, that support person is allowed to stay with them the entire time they are using our facilities, using our programs. They are allowed to bring that support person free of charge if they are attending a public swim or a public skate. They are also allowed to bring their service animal with them into any facilities. That service animal is allowed to stay with them as long as it is allowed by law. So if it's a place that the public can't go, the service animal can't go into that space by themselves. If it's, for example, a food prep area and an animal is not allowed, we would work around and find a different solution for that person to receive support without their service animal. That is covered under that one. Information and communication is how people receive and give information in any communication. So that includes our website, that includes any guide that we put out, any social media we put out, all has to be accessible. Our website should be fully accessible. Anything we're posting should be available in accessible format, or we need to be telling people that it is available in alternative format upon request. And anything that does need to be given in an alternative format needs to be done in a timely manner. So if somebody requests it and they say like, hey, I've got this one page, and say they send it to me and say, hey, I've got this one page, and I can say, okay, I can have that back to you in an hour. But I can't say like, okay, I'm just going to leave that and wait a week before we give that person that information when it takes me an hour to do it. If it's a longer document, maybe it's 20 pages, maybe I'll have to say, hey, listen, that's going to take me a week because it's a long, complicated document. And that would be a timely manner of us saying, hey, it's going to be a week, but is there something specific that we can give you that specific piece of information so you can get what you need sooner? So maybe it's us reading them the piece in the guide of what swim lessons are happening on Mondays so they can choose a time. But we have to give it to them in a timely manner, in a manner that is acceptable for them. So not everybody needs large print, not everybody who's visually impaired needs Braille, but maybe they need an electronic version that we can provide them. And then under the employment standard, that is that all employers have to provide accommodations for all employees who request them, and also throughout the entire job process. So that is through recruitment, onboarding, through the job process, and any return to work situations as well. For transportation, that covers all transportation, public transportation. That covers the vehicles, so vehicles should be accessible. It covers service stations, so a bus station, a bus terminal, GO train terminal, that gets covered under there. And training for staff falls under that one as well. And then design of public spaces standard, or what we call DOPS. That is one where it gets a little confusing because it concerns public spaces, but really it only considers parking lots, sidewalks, walkways, trails. If you're looking for accessible bathrooms, that's covered under the Ontario Building Code. And then customer service desks are covered under design of public spaces standard, but the actual lobby where that desk would be located would be covered under the Ontario Building Code. So we also use the Ontario Building Code when looking at accessibility as well. So helpful tips. When we're communicating and interacting with people with disabilities, we always want to put people first. So we always want to use preferred language. So language is a hard thing to talk about because there is no one-size-fits-all language. We always want to default to person-first language. Whenever we're interacting with someone, we put the person first and then their disability. So they're a person who uses a wheelchair, a person with cerebral palsy, a person who is blind, a person who is deaf. We put the person first. Their disability comes second to who they are. However, there are some people who like identity-first language because they feel their disability is a big part of who they are. They would prefer to use their disability first. So they like autistic. People who are capital D deaf prefer to be called deaf. People who are lowercase d deaf prefer a person who is deaf. So what do we do in these situations? We ask them, what is your preferred language? And then you use their preferred language. However, you don't then assume that because you met someone who was autistic last week and they prefer autistic, that the next autistic person you come across prefers that language as well. So just ask somebody, what language would you prefer me use when referring to your disability? It can vary day to day, location to location, situation to situation. And then remember that disabled and disability are not bad words. They're not something that's bad to say. A lot of people with disabilities prefer just use disabled, but some prefer people with disabilities. We can use them. They're not going to get offended by you using one or the other. So some labels that we want to stop using casually. So saying like, oh, you're so OCD, you're keeping your desk so neat. That's so psycho, she's acting so psycho today. Wow, you're so jittery, you must have ADHD. We want to stop using phrases like this in our everyday conversations. Others we want to avoid are retarded, stricken with or suffers from. A lot of people with disabilities don't suffer from their disability, they just live with them, so we want to avoid that language. Confined to, no one who uses a wheelchair is in their wheelchair 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They do get out of them, they are not confined to them. That is a tool that gives them independence and mobility and allows them to be active in their community. We want to avoid crippled, handicapped, because a handicap is what impairs a person, it's not really a label. So we don't call it handicap parking because that parking spot makes it accessible for them to use a facility. That parking spot is no longer a barrier when we have accessible parking. And we don't want to use any diagnosis as a slur. So what types of barriers do people with disabilities face? Physical barriers exist in a structural environment that interferes with or impedes a person with a physical disability from accessing a particular location or a service. So that would be stairs to get in. We have no door button to open a door. In a playground, using sand as our ground cover. Someone with a walker or wheelchair can't get through that to access the playground. So it's anything that's a physical thing that's in that environment that makes it hard. It would be if we left a chair in front of the door that somebody couldn't get around. Those are our physical barriers. We have communication barriers, which exist when an individual is unable to access information in a format that they can use. So alternate forms of communication could be audio, could be braille, large print, closed caption video, or a CD copy. However, everyone with a disability is different. They all require different things when it comes to accessing information, and we need to go with what that person needs. And the same goes the other way, that they should be able to communicate with us in a way that's accessible for them. So maybe they have a speech impediment and prefer not talking on the phone. They should be able to give us feedback through email if that's a better option for them. Systemic barriers, they occur when practices or policies are put in place that discriminate against individuals by screening them out from participation. So if we need someone to go pick something up at a location that has stairs and they can't get in the door, that would be a systemic barrier. If we post a job and say you have to drive in order to be able to do this job, when driving is not a regular function of their job, we are screening people out from the get-go by saying you have to drive to do this job. We want someone to pay their taxes and say you can only pay your taxes in person and you can only pay them at one location where you can't get in the door. That would be a systemic barrier. And then attitudinal barriers. They are inaccurate beliefs or perceptions about a person's ability based on assumptions and a lack of direct knowledge. This type of barrier impacts accessibility on all levels, since most other barriers are rooted in attitudes as well. These can be the hardest to address in spite of the fact that they are the ones we have the most control over. So these are our attitudes, these are unconscious bias towards people with disabilities when planning or putting things in place. And so they should be the easiest to change because we should all be able to change our minds, but a lot of times people have these thoughts in the back of their head that they might not consciously be thinking about them when deciding on things. So whenever we're interacting with people with disabilities, we want to use the acronym TALK. So we want to take the time to ask them, may I help you? We never want to assist someone with a disability without asking them their permission first. And we always want to ask and never assume. Don't assist unless you ask. Don't assist in a way that's not helpful for them. So sometimes we think we're being helpful and we hold open the door, but they're using a mobility aid and propping themselves up on the door. If we move that door without asking, they could fall. We see someone who's visually impaired, they're crossing the street, we don't know which way they're going, but you decide, oh, hey, they must be going that way because they're kind of facing that way, and you grab them by the arm and take them across the street. They now have no idea where they are. You're just being helpful, but because you didn't ask and they didn't tell you, yes, I need help, this is what I need, they're now on the other side of the road, they're confused, they have no idea where they are, and no idea how to get back to their start. Listen attentively and speak directly to the customer. This is one I find can be a problem here in the county. People aren't listening to what a person with a disability actually needs and what they require. So I often get phone calls and messages from people saying, oh yes, I need to pay my taxes. I'm going, okay, well, I'm accessibility, I can't help you pay your taxes. And talking to them, it turns out they have a speech impediment. So they were sent to me from customer service because they're like, oh, you have a disability, you must go to accessibility. Or I had someone who was looking for someone in planning and wrote in an email to the general county website, I'm looking for someone in planning, and said 3 times in the email the planning, but they also mentioned the word ramp, so it went straight to accessibility. So they're not even paying attention sometimes. They're not listening to what that person really needs before sending them to accessibility because they have a disability. am speaking directly to a customer. If someone comes up and they have a support person, they have an intervener, which is someone who assists people who are deafblind, or an interpreter for someone who is deaf, always look directly to the person you're talking to and not their intervener, their interpreter, their support person. That person's there to help them. They're not there to interact with you. Interact with the person you're interacting with. And then the K would be knowing what accommodations and special services are available. If you're ever unsure of what we offer here at the county, you're always free to contact me and I can let you know. But just some general things to be aware of. Yes, support persons are allowed to attend public swim, public skate free of charge. Yes, we provide supports in swimming lessons to children with disabilities. We have our Fair Grant program to assist with other recreational situations as well. We have support at summer camp. Our AAC is a great way for people to get involved if they want to make a difference as far as being a voice for people with disabilities here in the community. So just knowing what's available and then being able to direct them to where to go. I believe I am finished there.
You're all finished?
I am all finished.
Well, thank you for the presentation. Are there any other questions for Keely? Her job is a very difficult job. I sit on the committee, accessibility committee, and until you've sat on that committee and you see people on the committee that have disabilities or they have things going on in their life that they're concerned with, and they're asking us to just do things that we should be doing on our own without being asked to do them. There's a whole lot of common sense rolled into giving direction for accessibility. The builders have to put in ramps, but if the ramps aren't close to the accessibility parking, they make no sense. If the ramps are too steep or if they're too long, or there's language to say what we have to do and what we should do, but there's other components to it that if they're not connected to those good decisions of laying ramps and making parking spots and all of those things, curbs and the grinding of pieces of concrete when they meet concrete so that you're wheeling in your wheelchair and you don't just tumble over sideways. It's all the common sense pieces that we don't think about until I think everyone should have to get in a wheelchair for a day and try to get around because it's unbelievable how difficult it is. And so I think we as a council need to be supportive to the accessibility team. I think we are, but I think you need to come and tell us when you need things and when we can help you. So I'm glad to sit on that committee, and I know the councilors that sit on it with me are invested in it. So thank you for your presentation. Are there any other questions? Councilor Miller?
Just you got my wheels going. Through you, Mr. Mayor Tequila, when's Accessibility Day, or is it Accessibility Week? I'm not sure, but
Accessibility Week is the last week in May, so it starts the last Sunday in May.
okay. And what's the county doing for that?
So we will be raising the flag. We're actually raising it the Friday before, so that way we have it up for a full week before it will be raised for Pride, and then we will be running a social media campaign as well.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation, and we'll move on to the agenda. The next thing is we're going to go in camera, and before we go in camera, there's been something that's been bothering me for a little while, and I'm going to activate it today. I'm not looking for conversation or argument about it, but when we go in camera, we take the time to make sure we are in camera, and so I'm asking you not to text or use your phones when we go into in-camera sessions. It bothers me when I see people texting when we've gone to the trouble of making sure our room is secure and we've done oaths of confidentiality. And I'm going to ask you, whenever I'm in the chair, and I'm hoping to make it a policy in the county, that when we go in camera, no matter what we're talking about, that there's no communication by cell phones. And if it is an emergency, please feel free to leave the room. But I think it's very uncomfortable to watch people texting when we're supposed to be talking to each other in confidence. So that's my plug for today. We'll talk about it again another time if you object to it. But for today, and I don't know what you're going to do tonight because I won't be in the chair, but I'll be enforcing that until we get comments back from staff. I just don't understand why we wouldn't do it. But anyway, at this point, I'd like a motion to accept the presentation, please, from Keely. Councillor Howes, seconded by Councillor Oakley. All those in favor? Thank you. And now I need a motion to go in camera. Councillor Bell, seconded by Councillor Kyle. All those in favor? And we're going to go in camera. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, he's either pointing or he's having a stroke, right? Yeah, okay. So we are now back in open session, looking for a motion to adjourn.